My next guest is author of a bill requiring drivers to use hands-free technology while driving in Minnesota. Senator Jim Carlson joins me in the studio to discuss his ongoing efforts to get this law passed, as well as to offer his perspective of the recent joint meeting of the Judiciary and Transportation Committees. Welcome, Senator.
Well, thank you very much, Shannon.
Washington State just passed a law called the Driving Under the Influence of Electronics, or the DUIE Act, which forbids the use of all handheld gadgets while driving. Eating and grooming are secondary offenses. The Washington language creates a link in my mind of driving with electronics and driving under the influence of alcohol or drugs. Do you think these are similarly dangerous activities?
I do. Now, driving under the influence is a proven influence on your driving and on reaction times and things like that. So it's been against the law to drive while under the influence for years. Now, the problem with driving with an electronic device taking your attention away is it's not been found illegal, or it's not been passed as illegal. And I managed to get a law passed about distracted driving enhancing the penalty when there's great bodily harm and death. And so what we had to do is we had to define it so that a person intentionally disregarded something that they know. And what they know is that distracted driving can influence your driving. So that's what we have to do in this particular case as well, is to identify driving while you're speaking on a phone, handheld device, as being distracted. Now, there's a lot of there's a lot of leeway in there where does that include fiddling with your radio? Does it include driving with a hands-free device? Those are the kinds of things that we have to address and make sure that we put some lines between them.
Is there any element of this Washington law which basically just takes away all handheld activities that you would like to see modeled in Minnesota?
Well, I'm not familiar with that particular legislation. I do know that as of October 1st that Oregon did pass something that was very similar, and they put a lot of teeth in their law. It's a $250 fine, and if you have a third offense in 10 years, it can be 6 months in jail. So it's very, very serious. They're recognizing that this is a very serious problem. And I think all of us recognize it as well, because as we drive, we see people that are wandering in their lane. They're staying along at stoplights when it's gone green. There have been many tragedies where people are not watching out. So it's something that I think people recognize, and we just have to do something about it.
Well, and you mentioned tragedies, and I think that often the impetus behind these laws is the death of someone, and then that person's family gets involved in trying to make that loss mean something into the future. Is that true behind your effort? Did somebody lose a child or a family member?
Yes, there have been several people, one of them being a person that I happened to know for several years, that her brother-in-law was tragically killed when he walked across the street by his own driveway. We had the bus driver from southern Minnesota, a retired bus driver, that was killed when he did the same thing, went to get his newspaper, and someone paid no attention to him being on the street and hit and killed him. We had that incident in East St. Paul where a woman was talking on her phone and made a turn and ran into a child. Now, the child was injured, but not severely. So, it's obvious that people are just not paying attention. And this is a rather new thing, to have telephones that you can use in the car. And I think we all know that you do pay a lot of attention to what's going on in the telephone, and you somewhat blank out on what's going on around you.
You mentioned teeth. What kind of teeth do you think legislation in Minnesota needs to make people change their behavior?
That's a tough question, because we don't want to make it so bad, so hard, that, for instance, the law enforcement officer has to make a decision too. So if he sees a woman taking her kids to school on 8 o'clock in the morning, and she chatted on the phone, or maybe calling the school and telling them that she's going to be late, is that something that deserves a $250 fine? Or is it something that we can have a little bit of compassion on that person? Now, if there's an accident, changes the story. So when I think of enforcement, I'm thinking of publicity, training, awareness, maybe bumper stickers, maybe things like that. KARE 11 has a long series of distracted driving spots that they've been putting onto their newscasts. And I think people are getting very aware of it. And every time you see something, some tragedy that comes into the newspapers, I get an email. So we're getting people informed. I have some of my constituents that are very strongly for this bill, and I don't know if they've had a personal tragedy or not, but they certainly are irritated with the people that are driving and speaking on the phone and really are distracted.
Well, I'd like to bring this into the recent joint meeting that you had. Senator Limmer said that recent headlines were one of the reasons why he called the joint committee. There was an incident in September where a reportedly unlicensed driver under the influence of drugs was using her cell phone and killed Wayzata police officer Bill Matthews. Can more laws really stop these kinds of incidences from happening?
Well, that's a very interesting question to have. Now, driving under the influence of drugs we already know that's dangerous. And in fact, in that case, because that's against the law, the not having a driver's license is probably a lower level crime. And this person is probably looking at criminal vehicular homicide or at least criminal vehicular operation. So this particular law or change is not going to affect that level of crime that much, because that's a very serious one, and it goes well above talking on a phone and driving, and especially talking on a phone and having an accident or having a crash. We don't like to call them accidents anymore.
Right, because it could have been prevented.
Right, yes, but they certainly are preventable. Every time I get involved in this subject, I think of a bumper sticker, maybe 2 bumper stickers. Hang up and drive now, talk later. And those will probably, I'm hoping that somebody's going to take the initiative to have something like that printed up before we come to the committee in February.
Before we have to go, as a member of the Transportation Committee, that joint meeting, what did you take away from that? What was useful to you?
The main thing was the technical details of what constitutes a suspension, a revocation, and a cancellation of a driver's license. In America, we have been, I think, pretty lax on how we train drivers. Other countries train their drivers very seriously. For instance, we had a German exchange student. He managed to get his driver's license in Minnesota. Now, that gives him a driver's license when he's 16, and you can't get it in Germany until he's 18. He did the behind-the-wheel training here with a school, Bob's Driving School in Burnsville, and had the test there. In Germany, you have to have a certain number of hours. You cannot be trained by your parents, which is far different than what we've had here. And I think that we need to have more training. We need to have, for instance, skid pad training. I have a friend that runs a skid pad training
like
school.
how to stop in the midst of a skid and the unforeseen things that can
skid
happen.
On water, skid on snow, skid on dry pavement. And those things I think are really important for drivers to know in the U.S. And we just don't pay attention to that.
Senator Carlson, I'd like to talk more about this, but we've got to go. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.